This episode of Voices of the Elephant is brought to you by Nomad PHP. Start a habit of continuous learning. Visit nomadphp.com and subscribe today. Welcome to the Voices of the Elephant podcast. Each episode of Voices of the Elephant brings you an interview with a member of the PHP community. From project leaders to user group organizers, we talk to the people that are helping make the PHP community special. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Voices of the Elephant. This is Voices of the Elephant Live. For those of you who are participating live, thank you for tuning in. We hope you find this a very good use of your time. My special guest today is Mr. Paul Jones, good friend of mine. Say hello to everybody, Paul.
Hello, everybody.
Now, Paul, you're in Nashville?
I am, just outside of Nashville, a place called Burns, Tennessee.
Oh, okay. Is it as cold there as it is in Nashville?
It is, yes, it's rather chilly here right now. I think it's 20 degrees with the wind chill.
I'm telling you, son, move down to God's waiting room. It's nice and warm down here. So
I would love nothing more.
Hey, Paul, of course, for those of you who do not know Paul, Paul has been kicking around the PHP community longer than I have. You and I met at somewhere in Toronto at one of Marco's conferences up in Toronto, PHP Works or something up in Toronto.
Right.
That was about the first time we met, but you've been doing this stuff longer than I have. You've written 2 frameworks. You've worked on Zen framework, but you are now an architect-level PHP developer for hire for different companies. But you've been working on something new that is applicable to most of us. It could have an impact on most of us. Tell us a little bit about this new project that you've got going.
Sure. So this project is what I'm calling it's a standards initiative. The title of it is the Package Development Standards Initiative. You can see it at php-pds.com. The idea behind this is to go back to looking at the entire PHP ecosystem as evidenced by people who publish packages, and then figure out what the commonalities are between all the packages in the ecosystem, or at least all the ones that are on packages. Mm-hmm. Figure out what the commonalities are, and then publish those as standards. The idea is that in a package-oriented system, which is what PHP seems to have, it's either in the process of becoming or has already become. It makes a lot more sense not to look at libraries per se, even though they're published as packages, or frameworks or content management systems. In a package-oriented system, it seems that because a package is the unit of delivery, and as Matthias Novak talks about in Principles of Package Design, the package is the unit of reuse, that analyzing packages in and of themselves is the thing to look at when you're trying to figure out what are the commonalities in development practices. And it turns out
very cool.
Thank you for saying. The fun thing about this is because Jordy and his conspirators have put together Packagist, it provides a really great sampling pool for figuring out what people are doing in their packages, how they're not just how they're delivering them, but how they're putting them together. If you haven't looked at it lately, there are over 120,000 packages on Packagist right now. So that gives you a really great, like I said, a sample or a pool to draw samples from.
I know Jordy does a lot of statistical analysis based on those. Well, now let me ask you, and if for those of you in the chat room, I've pasted the URL in there so you can take a look at it for the new system that the standard Paul's working on. But now, is this this is the Paul Jones way? This is the way I like doing them. So.
Yes, clearly it's the way I like doing things. No, one of the funny things about this research is it points out that none of my packages actually comply with the first offering. The idea behind this, again, it's research based. The idea is that you go out, you look at all these different packages. You have to pick a sample, of course. You can't look at 120,000. So for this particular first offering, which is a standard on the top level file names and directory names and packages. The idea was that we want to look at people who have done at least three, we've done more than 3 packages so that they have some experience in building multiple packages. So it really is research based, and when we look at those, it turns out that the sample of all of those, once you take out the ones that appear to be missing or aren't on GitHub, that kind of thing, you end up with, I think it was 65,000 packages in the sample. And of those, 47,000 of them all pretty much do the same thing. And you can go out to, again, php-pds.com and click on the PDS skeleton standard, the draft standard, and look at the research behind all of this. So again, none of this, it's not what I prefer. It's what 47,000 package developers have ended up doing across packages without necessarily coordinating with each other.
Yeah, I was looking over the proposed standard, and I was like, okay, yeah, my systems do that. Oh, I rename. I don't use public. I use public HTML and little things. I don't use docs. I use documentation. Which, by the way, I was so glad to see that makes it in there, because there's always something like that's where Joe and I are working on something, and so that's where my database model is. That's where the SQL to create the new database is. There's always just ancillary documents that have to be stored in a project, and they end up, if you don't have a documents directory, they end up polluting the root directory of the project or something. So I was glad you put something like that in there. So
it was. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It was one of the things I expected to be there. But I found a lot of other things I didn't expect to be there too. So the documentation thing is clearly there under different names. You said there's, we talked about docs. There's there's documentation. There's examples. There's all of these sort of bundle up into the generic idea of a documentation directory. But there's also room in the standard for other top-level directories if you want them. It doesn't say these are the only ones that have to be there. It just says if you're providing documentation, everyone seems to have settled on the word docs. That's what you should be using.
Very cool. Now, so you analyzed all these packages, but you said something just now that struck my interest. You said that they all rolled up into the docs concept. Did you do some analysis of the package beyond just running a script saying, oh, they've got this, and documentation seems to be the most popular, or did you roll up concepts and then put the concepts in there as well?
So there's a little bit of rolling of concepts in there. So I went through, I think it was 2 passes or 3 passes. It's all documented in the research document. I started out with the idea that, we all know that there are certain top-level directories that we want to see because we have certain intent of what the content of those ought to be. And we figure there's going to be a source code directory, a test directory, something like that. What was surprising about this was, in the first pass, all I did was list all of the names of all the top-level elements in the sample of 65,000 packages, and just list them top-down with by directories and by files. Of course, the very first item in all of them is a directory called source, and then right after that, there's one called tests, and then later on, there's one called docs. So once I identified these top-level ideas, these top-level names, in a second pass, actually in a second pass, I went through and looked at all of the rest of the listings that were not, the top 1% or whatever, and tried to find all of the other directory names that seemed to match those most commonly occurring names. So docs and documentation, all seem pretty clearly to relate each other, so those all group up under docs, and that tells you what percentage of people are actually providing some form of documentation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm following you.
Does that answer your question,
okay.
I guess?
That answers my question, yes. Okay, we do have a question from the IRC channel. It does not specify this in your standard, but tabs or spaces? No, actually, Joe does have a serious question. If the requirements are, well, that was Joe. That wasn't technically me.
Good, yes.
Okay, but the serious question is, if the requirements are formed and based on existing packages, is there forward momentum of standards? Is the forward momentum of the standards going to be this is how we do it, or is there going to be a way to introduce change into this going forward if a new concept or a better idea comes along?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. So the way we're used to seeing standards is they're numbered. So there's an RFC number, an IETF number, an IANA number, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
At the programming language level, at the package level, I'm not certain that that makes sense. When we deliver our packages, we deliver them with semantic versioning version numbers. So
Mm-hmm.
it seems to make sense to me that what we want to do for package-related standards is to do something more along those lines. So to
Okay.
release a package standard, you give it a name. In this case, it's PDS skeleton because it's describing the top-level skeleton directory structure and file structure of a package. And then you give it a version number. So this current one is at 1.0 alpha 1, meaning that it might still be in a little bit of flux. In fact, I'm going to be opening it up for public review later today so that all
Okay.
package authors can have some opportunity to comment on it and see if it makes sense to them, see if there's some errors in the analysis, that kind of thing. And then once it appears that there are no substantial errors in the document, we can move to beta so people can start adopting it, and then move to stable. And then thereafter, because we're using something like semantic versioning, if it turns out that there are spelling problems, spelling changes, that kind of thing, or minor wording problems, we can release a 1.01 stable, 1.02. If we end up adding things that I will say are minor but additional, that do not break the previous version, aren't effectively backwards, that are not effectively backwards incompatible with the current stable version, we can release it as a 1.1 or 1.2, that kind of thing. And then as people do significantly different things in their packages, and as research reveals those things, there will still be a need for a top-level package skeleton, but then we can release a version 2 of it so that people can say, well, I'm compliant with version 1, or I'm compliant with this newer version, version 2, that is perhaps more strict.
Okay.
So there's a way of modifying it in a way that is backward compatible and that allows forward movement as well.
How do you anticipate package managers using this? When I start a new package, am I to require this in as part of my package, or is this a chiclet that I put on my README, or what?
So one of the problems with tracking standards adoption is that it's hard to tell how many people are using what I will call non-class based standards. If you've got a standard interface, then that's available as a package and you require it. But with these kinds of standards that are organizational standards or non-code based standards per se, it's a little bit harder to track those. People generally will say in the README, well, I'm attempting to adhere to this or I'm trying to comply to that. It makes it kind of hard to track, and it makes it kind of hard to look at just the package manifest and know as a developer what the standards are that you should be applying to the package when you're working on it with someone else. So what I've done for PHP PDS is I have created a vendor called PDS on packages, and
Mm-hmm.
this standard is published as a package. So in Composer, for example, you can say in Composer require dev PDS skeleton and give a version number. And then two things happen. Number one, everyone who reads the manifest knows that that's the standard for compliant that you're trying to comply to. The second thing is when we go back and do follow-up research, we can download your Composer file and see very quickly if you are attempting to comply with the standard or not. That will give us some idea as to the adoption levels.
Very cool. Joe asked another question. Any plans to release a package generator based on the standard for new package developers to easily craft compliant packages right out of the gate?
Again, that's a great question. Because we are delivering the standard as a package, what that means is that if we want to, we can provide tooling along with the package. So it's not necessarily just a README with a list of the rules in it. We can add in a binary directory and put in there a script that will automatically create a package structure for you. So you can, right at the beginning of your project, Composer require dev PDS skeleton, Composer update or Composer install, and then vendor bin package skeleton create from PDS skeleton, and it will create a compliant package structure for you. I want to be clear, that doesn't exist yet, but it is possible
Okay.
to do with this method of delivering the standards publications.
Very cool. Now, you said that you're going to open this up for comment. I'm assuming you're just going to open up the GitHub repo and have the comments as issues. Anybody can fork it, submit PRs, you discuss the PRs, that kind of stuff.
That's exactly right. Again, this is primarily a research project. It's relatively mechanical in the sense that all it is a script going out collecting stuff. There has to be a little bit of judgment applied to the results to make sense out of them. So although it has a lot of the trappings of science, I want to point out that this is not actually a scientific project. There's really only one science. It's called physics, and everything else is stamp collecting. So this is a variation on stamp collecting. But when you're doing that, what it means is that you have to apply a little bit of professional judgment. So the purpose of the review period is to make sure that the judgment that I have applied to reading the results of the research has no errors or has very few errors in it. And the public review and commentary period should go a long way to removing any errors that are found, removing any errors that may have crept in.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Okay, do we have any other questions from the Peanut Gallery? Nope. Going once, going twice. Okay. Paul, I'm going to finish up with the same question, or same two questions I ask everybody. What's your local user group and what is the URL?
Local user group is Nashville PHP, and I believe the URL is nashvillephp.org, although I'm sure Ben Ramsey and Jacques Woodcock will correct me and give me a lot of hassle if I got that wrong.
Well, it just redirects to Meetup anyhow, so everything always ends up on Meetup. So, okay. Well, Paul, I want to thank you for being with us here today on Voices of the Elephant, and for the 10+ years that you've committed to this community. I want to thank you for everything that you've done for the PHP community.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you've done too.
Thank you, sir. Goodbye, and we'll talk to you next week on Voices of the Elephant. Thanks for listening to Voices of the Elephant. Voices of the Elephant is copyright EICC Incorporated and released under a Creative Commons Attribution, No Derivatives, Share and Share Alike license. To nominate someone to be a guest on Voices of the Elephant, visit our website and click on the Nominate link. The URL is voicesoftheelephant.com. Elephant is of course spelled ELEPHPANT.